Okay, so 1 point perspective. Okay, one of the key things that many of you guys have never been used to, we have a couple main steps I'm going to have you do whenever we do thumbnails with any type of interior or exterior. And that's what's really important is first thing we're going to do is we're going to frame up every piece. A lot of artists have a tendency to start sketching and they don't frame their pieces. So when we go to start, the first thing I want you to do is, give me a second here, let's figure out why. That's not good. I have no blue coming out. Oh, that's why. Awesome. There we go. Okay. Okay, cool. We're good to go. All right, so we're always going to frame up our work when we start. Okay, so first thing I'm going to see, rule number one, is I want to see this. I want you to have a dedicated frame inside your piece, and we're going to start basically creating little thumbnails. Okay, thumbnails are exactly what they sound like. They're little drawings the size of your thumb. Okay, so it's extremely important that you guys frame your work up, number one. I always have students that are going to turn in their work. It won't be framed. When work isn't framed, I can't tell where your edges are. Things fall off. You can't see where the composition's supposed to be. Huge problem, okay? Step number two that we're going to do is once we're done with that, we're going to throw on a horizon line. And some of you have never been exposed to a horizon line, so I'm going to talk about that real quick. Okay, and I'm going to go over that with you. So what is a horizon line? Okay, horizon line is also called an eye level. Okay, I like to think of it particularly as a horizon line because I might have characters inside my environment that have a different eye level than where the horizon line is. And the horizon line to me is what dictates the ground plane and the sky plane. Two different planes in perspective, they're going to represent depth. Okay, so let me go ahead and give you an example. I'm going to come in here right now and I'm going to just throw a line right across here. I'm going to call this my horizon line. Label it as your HL so you know where it is. Okay, when that's done, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pick a vanishing point. Okay, so what is a vanishing point? A vanishing point is a point on my horizon that items converge to. So that's how perspective works. When we are standing and we're looking at a road, we're looking at a hallway, we have a series of items that are going to converge to a particular vanishing point. Okay, I'm going to come in here, I'm just sort of freehanding this. I'm going to draw what's like a rough grid that's going to recede back to my horizon line. Okay, so now if I come back in here and as I retract and get closer, I'm going to increase the spacing for the size of my grid. Okay, so let me come over here. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to raise my horizon line now up higher. Okay, so it's up there. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to pick a dedicated VP. There's my vanishing point. You can even label it as your VP. Okay, and then I could come in here and I'm going to draw a grid off of that vanishing point. Okay, and the same thing when I go across here, it doesn't have to be exactly perfect. You don't have to have every increment figured out. Okay, I'm just going to sketch a rough grid going across. And as I recede back, I'm going to make each space a little bit larger. That way I get the feeling of a dedicated grid plane. Why do I want a dedicated grid plane? It's going to give me an understanding when I'm drawing on top of how to place shapes and arrangement in perspective. Okay, a grid plane is always important because it basically it's like your guideline that enables you to think about how things exist. Without a dedicated grid plane to look at, you end up just having a box like this, and you just start sketching shapes in here, and without that horizon line, you're not quite sure where things might be hitting, where if an object is in front of another object, where they're standing. Okay, so because of that, I always sketch in my grid plane. Once I have my grid plane in, it really gives me an understanding of, hey, if I have something hitting the ground here, okay, oops, that was crooked, converging back to that vanishing point, and if I draw a line straight up here, I come up from the top of this box, I'm going to recede that back down to that vanishing point. Okay, all right, now I'm going to keep going with this. What I'm doing is I'm working in 1 point perspective. Okay, 1 point meaning that I have one key vanishing point that exists inside my piece here. Okay, so let me come over here. I always start simple. Okay, first thing we did, let's write them up here. Rule number one, we created a frame. Okay, rule number two, next thing that we did is we placed in our horizon line. Number three is we established a VP, a vanishing point. Step number four, we created what I call trace lines. Okay, / grid plane. for us to work off of, okay? So now if I were to continue to come over here and keep working, I could come over here and I could even go ahead and just create box shapes off of the shapes that are hitting the ground right here. You see this? Okay. What's important is remember the same thing that applies down here. What recedes back to that VP is going to be the same thing for up on the top here. My items are going to recede back, okay? So from this point on, I could just continue stacking a bunch of shapes all over each other, just cubes in front of other cubes. When I draw, and the majority of good artists that I know that draw, one of the key principles to remember in drawing is simple arrangement of shapes, shapes overlapping other shapes. In order to be able to do that, you have to have an understanding of where the ground plane is and where the horizon is, okay? So from this point forward, I can continue to come in here and I can draw a series of other boxes, okay? Now, I am working in one-point perspective, so what does that mean? In one-point perspective, all my lines that are going horizontal right here, okay, let me go ahead and switch to a red here so I can highlight them when I want, okay? All my lines that are going in this direction right here, those are all horizontal, okay? They stay that way no matter what. The minute I come over, and if I start drawing a box over here, and I do this, let's say here's my VP, okay? And I start to do this right there, okay? I've now introduced two-point perspective, which means I've introduced a secondary vanishing point because these edges are converging back this way to that VP, okay? These are now converging back here. The drawings that we're going to do in one-point perspective, we're going to make sure we keep these, this is one-point perspective, we keep these dedicated lines horizontal. So anywhere inside my composition, hold on, let me go ahead and switch. Let me go back to my eraser real quick. And let me switch up here. I have a certain eraser that I like to use. It works really well. There we go. So give me a second here. Okay, and then let me switch back to my brush here. Okay, let me put my horizon. Oops. This is one of the problems with the Cintiq sometimes. There we go. Get smack dab up there. So let's say my VP's here. So if I draw another box over here in one-point perspective, okay, I already know I could start it pretty much as a square because I know my lines are going to be horizontal. So if I come over here and I draw a line going across, and I come up here, I draw a line going across, draw a line down, that's my key shape. From here, everything else from these ends are just going to converge back to my VP, my vanishing point here. That's going to converge back there. This is going to converge back in here. Now you'll notice I'm ending it. I'm stopping the lines. If I were to come over, take my ruler, come back over here and dot it out, you can see that I have a dotted pattern that's going to go back and hit my VP there. I just noticed my pen is slightly off calibrated. It's about a quarter of an inch off. So when I touch this, it drops a little lower. Like that, okay? So that's correct. That's the perspective we're working on this piece. It's one-point perspective, okay? We're not going to be diving into two-point, okay? We'll do that later. First, we need to nail one point and stay simple in our approach, okay? We're working on a warehouse. So I will post up a reference that I have for you on the blog, and then I'll also link up what we're talking about here. So when in a warehouse, the reason why I have the reference that I'm going to post up there, it's all a bunch of simple box shapes overlapping other box shapes, right? But if it's drawn correctly, and then if you render it correctly, you end up with a really nice looking piece that represents one-point perspective. Now, some people think that one-point perspective is a layman's perspective. It's not important. It's completely the opposite, okay? Two-point perspective is great. 3 points, also a lot of fun. I'll get into that later, okay? One-point perspective is extremely important because whenever we have any scenes that indicate wealth, indicate religion, okay, an area of importance, okay, a particular entrance to a building or a fortress, a scene of battle, we see it in one-point perspective. So if you look at staging, this is when we get into cinematography, and you look at storyboard artists that set up movies and elements, okay, here, I can just show you this real quick. I wasn't going to go this far into this in the lecture right now, but here, let me go over here and I'll bring up a couple images in Google. So let me type up the interior of a church, okay? If you look at the interior of any church, what are we going to notice about it? Okay, the majority of times we're going to see this interior like this. it's framed in 1-point perspective. Okay, even though the VP is right here and it's converging off, and some of the horizontals here are starting to lightly converge to another vanishing point. But here's a great example: 1-point perspective. Okay, why? It expresses a center of interest, and it expresses importance, and it's a religious artifact. Okay, so it doesn't matter if you're Islamic, Jewish, whatever faith you might be. The majority of any type of church that's laid out from the exterior to the interior is set up on a symmetrical foundation. Okay, and you will notice that these images all center around 1-point perspective. Look at this shot. Okay, 1 point right there. All right, so let me go back here. Let's go ahead and let's type in Braveheart real quick here. Everyone likes Braveheart, right? Great movie. Okay, let me type in Braveheart battle scenes. Okay. The majority of times, whenever you see an army that's going to attack something of battle that has importance, you will see it in this shot. This is 1-point perspective shot. This is looking at a particular point of view of something massive coming towards us that displays importance. Okay, so that was Braveheart, right? Let me go back over and let's type in Gladiator. Okay. Give me a second here. I was trying to think. I have all this on another. Here we go. Okay. See that shot? 1-point perspective. Do you remember that scene in Gladiator? Okay. That's when the bad guy, our protagonist character, right, is coming back into town, and I don't know what to call it, Roman city dwelling, right? He's coming back in, and he's approaching on this chariot, and he comes back to us. Everything's set in 1-point perspective. Why? There's a dedicated reason why they didn't do it in 2-point. They did it in 1 because you're talking about the Roman Empire. You're talking about a guy who's going to become the head of the whole entire, the Caesar of the Roman Empire, okay? Someone of extreme importance, okay? Let me go back there. Another shot that you saw. Another 1-point perspective shot, okay? So there's a ton of importance when we look at the use of 1-point perspective. Do not dismiss it in any shape or mean, okay? I have some students go, oh, it's boring, it's 1 point. No, it's the opposite. It's a great perspective. And when it's used inside CG environments to display, give me a second here. I can't do 2 things. I can't talk at the same time. And when you use it inside CG, it's great because it's a great way to explain multiple facets on a house. I mean, I can't talk, on a show. So having an image in 1-point perspective shows a total of 5 walls. Okay, you have a ground plane, you have 2 side walls, you have a ceiling and a back wall. So you could just do a reverse then, and that gives a lot of information for a 3D show, okay, that you normally wouldn't get in that particular angle. Whenever you see buildings of importance, okay, especially houses of the rich and the wealthy, you will see them inside 1-point perspective. Okay, let me come back here. Okay, let's come over here. Let's think of some other really important buildings that we might see. And this is things that we take on that we see every day, but sometimes we take for granted. Okay, look at the White House. We see this building in 1-point perspective. We never see it in 2-point, on occasion, but the majority of the times it's 1-point. Why? It's the house and the office. Okay, I had a student tell me, yeah, because it's white. No, this is where the most powerful man in the United States sits and makes his decisions during the day. Okay, that's why. When you look at other famous monuments, you will see them in 1-point perspective. When you look at important photos of people, you will see them in 1-point perspective. Okay, if we come over here and we want to see the most, some people call him the most powerful man in the world because he has control of the army, right? You will see shots of the Oval Office in 1-point perspective. Okay, so look at this. When you see the president working, it's a low-res shot there. Let's try another shot here. You see his office in 1-point perspective. When you see the interior of a church, 1-point perspective. When you see a battle scene, 1 point. When you see rich houses, 1 point. Okay, things that are really important are going to be displayed in one-point perspective. There are times when you might see him. Here's President Obama casually talking on the phone, right? And he might be at a two-point shot. That's a little different, okay? The majority of photos that you see is going to be in flat 1 point, okay? So there's an extreme importance to one-point perspective. Do not dismiss it. You can create all kinds of wonderful environments with it, okay? It's really a wonderful tool. Now, let me come back to this because I have some more to explain to you guys, and it's really important to move from here. So let me just do a quick review because I'm throwing this at some of you guys who've never even encountered this. How many people have never even been told this stuff before or had this part of a background? Everyone has? Really? Okay, good. Then everyone's going to have awesome assignments. So, but we know number one, I want a frame from you. Number two, I want an indication of your horizon line. I want you to label it like that. Number three, I want a vanishing point. Number four, put down a grid line or trace lines. Okay? All right. The next thing is that, and I don't want to keep writing all these steps, but I'll just sort of put them over here. Let's say number 5, okay, that all lines, I should just put all HL, all horizontal lines are going to be horizontal. Okay, and I know that's sort of repeating myself, but do not converge those like this into a second vanishing point right now. We don't need to do that, okay? All right, that's not needed. Stay with basic 1 point. Okay, what I want you to do is I want you to come into a piece, and I want you to basically start off with a little bit of little thumbnails like this. Draw a large square if you want like this. That might be the interior of your warehouse. Okay? And then think about, you know, do I have a roof structure up here? Maybe I have a whole bunch of crates here. Maybe I have some larger crates here. Do I have crates stacked up on top of each other? Up in here. Okay? Think about what it is that you have inside your room here. Maybe come back up here. I have a large element here that's in the foreground, right? Every one of these are going to be converging back and forth to this key VP here. All right? Do one study. See, I already did out of habit. I started to angle that right there, and I'll tell you why in just a second. Okay? Do a whole bunch of studies of the interior of a warehouse with a bunch of boxes. You can have boxes, crates. What's important to me right now is this, that I'm going to do right here, that you are drawing through the shape. Now, here's the key difference. Everyone in this room has had perspective, but 90% of you, 80-90% of you, will not be able to do what's called applied perspective, which means you'll not be able to apply your knowledge of perspective and be able to create it accurately inside a drawing. You will not be able to draw through your shapes. This is of extreme importance. This is drawing through the shape. If I'm going to come over here right now, and if I'm going to place a box right here, okay, like this, that is wrong. That's not correct. Okay, does anybody know why? It's not correct because if I draw through my shape right now and find this edge, find this corner receding back to my VP here, I find that edge. I do the same thing for the top. I recede this corner, 2 dotted lines if you have to. If I come across here, see that? And if I find that back end there, do you see that? This is where this cube ends right here, right? This line right here is going to drop down and it's going to overlap it. You see it? It's overlapping my shape. I have 2 cubes overlapping each other. My perspective is off. This cube has to be moved forward a little bit. So what I could do is I could come in here. I could lightly erase that. Okay? And if I were to come over here and draw the edge right up to that line, then it would be correct. And then if I bring that down, and I could go ahead and draw it through, it would come down and end here, and it would go across. This is what drawing through the shape implies. This is of extreme importance, and one of the things that I find from working professionally and that I see with students is the one thing that is not used and forgotten of. I see it in when people sketch human figure in motion and in gesture and in figure drawing. I see it with character design, and you especially see it with environments where people overlap other shapes. But that's okay. That's what I'm here to do, is to point that stuff out to you, okay, and to explain to you. So all I want you to do is go in there and think of making a warehouse with a bunch of boxes overlapping each other. Do a series of thumbnails. Once you get to a point where you like one of your thumbnails, take that one and then maybe re-examine that a little bit. Maybe do it a teeny bit larger. Not a full-fledged rough, but just a little bit larger in size to get a better idea of what's taking place, okay? And so let's say, for example, I was in here. Let me tell you a couple no-nos that I tend to see from students when they're diving into perspective like this. The most common thing that students do is they tend to come in and they tend to make every box the same thickness. So do you see this right here? Okay. The thickness here, let me switch colors there. The thickness here to here to here to here to here and here are all pretty much about the same. Okay. We call that variation of shape. Take the opportunity to have some variation of shape. It makes your drawing more appealing and more interesting. Okay. So a lot of times when I work, my first thumbnail or two are horrible. Of course, I'm not, no one's a complete pro and their first thumbnail, you just nail it. You have to dive into it and you have to find the shapes and you have to find the angle. Now, that brings up something new I want to dive into. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to delete this page here real quick. I want to talk about finding the right angle and what that means. And then I also want to talk about something called the cone of vision and explain what that is. And that's why two-point perspective takes place. Okay. Give me a second here. Let me just change colors. Let me go back to my blue here. Okay. All right. So here we are. I'm going to frame up my piece here. Okay. Now, I mentioned about creating the right angle, right? All I mean by that is a couple do's and don'ts, right? What I don't want to do is throw my horizon line right in here. Why? It's right in the middle of my composition. It splits my composition and it immediately limits me from designing anything because I've already created the same amount of space right here as I have right here. Okay, it's boring. So what I want to do is if I take a couple steps back is I want to take the opportunity to lower my composition, okay, by dropping my horizon line down, or if I want, I can come in here and I could raise my horizon line up, okay. Now, each one of those is going to create two different effects. If my horizon line is raised up, it's going to indicate when I'm drawing that I'm looking down on top of boxes and shapes. So let me sketch that for you real quick. I'm going to come in here, I'm going to pick a VP. Okay, even when I pick a VP, I don't want to pick in the center all the time. Pick off to the side a little bit like that. Okay, so now if I come in here and I lightly sketch out a grid plane, can you see what's happening now? It gives the illusion that I am looking down on top of, let me do this real quick. I'm just doing this freehand, okay? Let me see if I can hold shift, go across here super quick. There, now I got a grid in there. Grid doesn't have to be 100% accurate. I'm using it to mold shape. I'm using it to allow me to see things in depth, okay? But the difference here is that my horizon line is up high. So therefore I'm looking down on things, okay? So let me add in another layer here real quick, okay? Sorry. All right, so here I'm going to come back and I'm going to indicate that same thing. All right, let's start over again. I'm going to start here with my frame. Okay. By the way, what I'm doing here, I'm using a metal ruler on my Cintiq. Don't do that. I use a plastic one at home. You can hold shift and draw, but I'm only doing it because I don't have my plastic one with me. Okay. In this case, now I'm going to draw a horizon line that's lower right here. Okay. And then I'm going to come over here and I'm going to pick a VP in there. Not in the middle right there. That's boring, right? I'm going to come over, let's say I throw my VP off a little bit like that. And I'm going to come in here and I'm just going to lightly sketch a rough grid plane. Okay, let me get this sketched out here. All right, so there. Now I'm going to hold shift and I can go across here and put a line there, put a line in there, a line in there. Okay? It immediately gives me something to anchor to. I have a dedicated feeling. So it doesn't matter if I'm on that particular view with my horizon line raised up. So when it's up, I'm looking down, right? Okay. And then here, my horizon line is dropped down. Okay. My VP is here in the center. And since it's down, it's allowing me to see on top of things. Okay. They're at a lower view. Okay. That's a huge difference, just to really understand the difference between those two. You can give me a warehouse that's in a shot like that. I've seen plenty of warehouses. In fact, I have a piece of reference on the blog. It's one of the opening sequences to I think the third Indiana Jones movie. Not open sequence, it's the ending sequence when they take the, was it the first? Thank you. When they take the Ark of the Covenant, and they put it away in boxes in a warehouse that was painted by an artist, and they roll it in. This is the shot you see. The horizon line's up. Something important's happening, so we see it in one-point perspective, and we're looking down on top of everything. Okay? If I was a little child that walked into a room and I was looking at a bunch of beds, I might be seeing things in this particular perspective. Okay? I might be low to the ground. Okay? Now, something else that I like to throw in to people to help them with a little bit of perspective is this other little comment here about, it's really simple. I use the analogy of a coffee cup or a quarter. Okay? Just remember this. Let's say I throw my horizon line right in here. Okay? If I'm standing right now, this is why some people call this the eye level. Okay? I prefer the horizon line, right? But if I have a coffee cup right now, and my coffee cup drops underneath this line, I can see on top of my coffee cup like this. See that? That's important. If I take that coffee cup, now look at me up here, and if I raise it like this, if I raise my water right here, I can see on top of that, right? If I raise that above my eye level right now, my horizon line, I can no longer see on top of it, right? That's a core principle here. So if I take this guy and I raise this up right now, this is what I'm going to see. Like that. Okay? I'm going to be looking underneath it because it is above my horizon line here. If I hold it right over my horizon line, this is what I'm going to see. That makes sense? It's going to be perfectly flat at one point with my eye level. That's not a good idea to put boxes like that, because then when I have a box here, my box will look like this. And then when it recedes here, it does the same thing. Does that make sense? This flattens it out. So it's a better idea to raise your box either higher or lower over that horizon line. Okay? It makes it much easier to understand the depth of what's happening. Okay? All right. So give me a second. Let me delete that page there. Okay. It's funny because the online class that I teach, I have some students that are constantly making little mistakes like that. And I'm always having to remind them, where's that quarter? You know, you can think of a quarter going up and down in perspective here. If it's down here, I can see much more of the surface of this quarter right here. As this quarter starts to get closer towards that horizon line, it's going to basically flatten out here. So that's going to change the elliptical shape of my lips. I'll see a little bit of my lips there. I'll see a little bit more. I see a little bit more. I see a little bit more. I see more. And it continues to the point where I'm looking down and I start to see a lot of my lips. Does that make sense? Because it's dropping from under my horizon line. So I really like that example. Same thing when I'm looking up here. I can see a little bit underneath. I see a little bit more, a little more, a little more, and more, and more, and more. Okay? Ellipses are hard to draw. Okay? No one really masters ellipses. Well, you can. Ellipses exist inside a square. So I don't recommend you guys right now to be diving in and drawing tons of elliptical shapes. Here's the next thing that I notice students do. They go to do a warehouse, and they put oil canisters in the warehouse. And it's like, really? Stick with simple boxes. Master the simplicity of something simple first, and then dive into the more complex elements. Okay? Next thing I want to show you guys really quick, I want to show you why that shape starts to turn. It's a principle, something that has to deal with the cone of vision. So how many people in here know what the cone of vision is? Anyone? No, but somebody showed you perspective though, right? But they didn't show you the cone of vision. Oh.
Like a 60 degrees distorted the farther away you move.
That's right. Okay. So the cone of vision, okay, has to deal with this. So now I'm going to try to give you a top view here, and I know this can be a little complicated. You don't have to figure it out. You just have to understand that it happens. Okay. This is how the cone of vision works. Okay. Here's a top view over here. If I have someone standing, let's say this line right here represents what somebody's seeing. And if you look this up in books, they call this the station point. Okay, or the viewer's point sometimes, all right? Stationary point. When you have a viewer who's looking at something in a direction, we see each one of our eyes, and pretty much in how perspective works, we see two two areas of 30 degrees, which equals 60 degrees. So we see 60 degrees coming out right here. Okay? When that comes back and hits, it basically, that's why they refer to it as a cone, is we see the circular area, okay, from that station point, okay, that's called the cone of vision. Anything inside that particular area will not feel distorted. It will be correct in perspective. So when something is drawn out of that cone of vision, it starts to feel distorted. Here, let me give you an example. Okay, so I'm going to come in here. I'm going to put a horizon line in that represents this line right here. Okay, so I'm going to come back here right now. I'm going to pick a VP. I'm going to come in here. I'm going to draw a box in 1 point perspective. My box recedes back to here and here. So there's the side. I come over here. I draw the top, and I put the side of my box like that. Let's say I'm going to come over here and draw another box here real quick right there. Okay, go across, back to my vanishing point right there, come back, drop off of it, okay, and come back from the beginning there. So there's my box shape there. Excuse my little error there with my pen, so I'm sketching this real fast, okay? So there's my box. I have two boxes existing in 1 point perspective, okay? So my cone of vision in here, okay, I still have a dedicated cone of vision, which is roughly, once I start to get further on out here, okay, I'm going to start to get a level of distortion happening in my cube. Okay, so let me give you an example of that. There used to be a test from Phil Roman to work on The Simpsons where they asked you to draw 5 tables next to each other, lunch tables, okay, but they give you the first couple ones. So you had a lunch table like this, okay, and then you had to have 5 of those. So then you end up having, I'm not going to draw the seat parts right now. So everything's horizontal. So let me put a little trace line in there like that. Let me put a trace line in here. Okay. So if I come back over here, and if I put another table right here, and in perspective, I can measure the distances. Since there's no convergence happening in 1 point, I could come over here and measure this distance from here to here, and I could just duplicate and put that here, and that would be the same table distance. So I'm going to eyeball it right now and just go ahead and say my table is about, man, this metal ruler sucks for drawing with. Okay, so there's my table there. And then if I come over here and I draw that same table right here, I measure that distance from here to here. I come over here and I plot that in about right there. So I'm going to go ahead and match this up. Come off the top here like this. Okay, and then I'm going to recede that back to my VP. This is where I notice this Cintiq pen isn't calibrated. It's a 1/4 inch off when I draw these lines, but that's okay for right now. Okay, I'm going to come in here. Here's a great example. Okay, is look at how long this table starts to feel here. You see the stretch in it right now? It feels like it's a longer table, but it's not. Okay, this table feels fine. So this was part of the test, is you had to come in and draw 5 of these tables, right? They did this on purpose, because then once you start getting outside of the cone of vision, okay, so if I come over here and start to draw another table. So what happens when you get outside of the cone of vision? Once you're outside of that cone of vision, and I know that this distance from here to here would end this table about here. So if I come back to that point and receive that back, okay, you can see the distortion that starts to happen here. Okay, do you see that? This is about the same thickness as that, but when it's going back here, see how skinny that gets? Okay, that's getting much more distorted. That's because it's outside of my cone of vision. My cone of vision in this right now would probably be somewhere about this indication right here. Okay, once I get out of this particular realm right here, things are going to get distorted. I'm going to get what are called acute and obtuse angles. Okay, so when I'm closer, let me go ahead and start over on this. Okay, let me bring up another layer right here. So when I'm closer to my VP and I'm within this little 60-degree area, sort of right in here, and some people ask, well, how do you figure out this 60-degree? Well, you sort of come back here and you can plot a point, and you just have to sort of, you can figure out where the stationary point would be. And you know that if this is right here, if that's a 90 and that's a 90, if you split that in half, you have two 45s, okay? If you come off of the center line, you find a 30 and a 30, and you draw these points out, you can have where they hit right there is going to be the indication of your, okay? So once I get out of that, I'm going to start to get some split off shapes in a sense that are going to start to, not split off, I'm sorry guys, I haven't had a cup of coffee yet. My mind's getting a little, let's get some distorted shapes, okay? So what happens is that when I'm close in here, if I have a box, my box is going to represent and feel like I have some angles that are closer to sort of 90-degree angles, okay? But now when I come way back over here and I start to draw a box, I'm going to get acute angles, which are angles that are going to be less than 90, and I'm going to get obtuse angles, which are angles that are going to be more than 90. So you see, this angle right here is this. It's really sharp. That's way less than 90 degrees. That's an acute angle. And then look over here. This angle here is this. It's much greater. Okay? Does that make sense? I'm pulling the shape so far off to the side, I'm going to start to get some distortion happening because I'm in 1-point perspective. And that's where 2-point comes in, is that what happens that once I get this further out like this, these ends want to start converging like this to a new vanishing point. Why? So we can keep our boxes set at 90s. When they're at 90s, they feel realistic. Okay? I'll go over that again with you, and I'll get a better example for you. I just sort of threw this together real quick here. Okay? But you can see what's happening when you go to draw something. Okay? You will get a little bit of distortion as you move off to the far right side or left side after you split off from like a center line of that vanishing point. That's just fine. There's nothing wrong with that. All you need to do is get in there and pretty much just piece something together. Okay, and start with the basics. Use your ruler, go off your vanishing point, make sure things are connected, okay, and start drawing off of that, okay, and that'll give you a better idea of how your room starts to fit together. Now, the other thing I'd recommend for you to do is to create a dedicated frame, since it's the interior of a warehouse, right? And to do that, it's really simple. Oops. I just come in here, and I'm going to take my blue, and I'm just going to go over here, and I'm going to draw my little shoebox like this. I'm going to bring it down to here. Okay, I'm going to draw a line straight across there, and then I'm going to come back in and take a line from the bottom of my vanishing point, go across right there, come back in from the top right there, and then come back in on that corner. This recedes back, oops, here to my VP. Okay, so all those lines are receding back, and come back from that corner. So there's my box shape. Then if you want to go in and you want to lightly erase some of the information that's in there, so you can have a box to build off, that's fine. But come back in and lightly pencil in and know where your VP is. That's of extreme importance. You need to have a placement for that vanishing point. Okay? And then from here, I'm doing a warehouse. So think about your warehouse. What is it about your warehouse that's specific? You can just do a warehouse. But if you think about something that has more of a background into it, is this warehouse have crates of missiles in it? So imagine if you were playing a game and you had to go into this warehouse and there were a bunch of boxes that shaped like military boxes, okay? Then you might want to do some reference and think about what are military boxes shaped like. Is this a chemical warehouse that might have boxes and some other items that are an odd shape? Is this going to be a warehouse that we saw in Indiana Jones that has a bunch of wooden freight ship boxes in it that are nailed together, that have wooden edges on them, right? I would think about that as I start designing in here. But the only thing I want you to do is pretty much have fun with it, do a series of thumbnails, and just, stay constant with it, Throw a shape in here, come up off your VP here. There's nothing wrong with having some sketchy lines. Make sure all your lines are horizontal. And then think about, hey, if I have this one here, what if I have a thinner box up here? What if I come back in here? What if I have a box that sticks out a little bit? Maybe this one's a little bit taller. You see how interesting that starts to look? Because I have boxes of all different shapes. Okay? Now the next thing I'm going to throw at you real quick is something called groupings. Okay? If I go into a warehouse and I do this is the next common thing I get from students. And that's all right. We're all here to learn, right? to about there, let's say. Okay. I get that, and someone goes, yep, here's my warehouse. You have boxes all over. There's like one here, one here, one here, one here. They're all over the place. What we want to do is go in there and create some groupings. Okay, we want to put some variations of shapes, put these mass these items together to create groupings that look and read as one particular element. So if I come over here and if I keep drawing a series of boxes and crates over on this side, I could even have some that are, you know, large, small. I even might get daring and try to tilt one. Okay. All right. Maybe I have another one up here. And I can see underneath it right there. Okay. Whatever I decide to do, what's important is at the end is that this right here reads as a group. That is a massed together shape of numerous elements. See that? Oops. That's a grouping right there. Okay. This is not a grouping. And what happens when we draw like that is the eye jumps all over the place. It doesn't know what to look at. The eye comes in here and it jumps here. Then it goes to here. Then it jumps to here. Then it jumps back here. And then it looks for something else to go to. And then it wonders, what's with all this space around here? Why is that important? Is it important? Okay? So think about your grouping shapes. And so if you have empty spaces like this, fill them in with more boxes. Okay? Come over here and then, you know, I might even have like 5 boxes like this all stacked on top of each other. So I might have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 like this. Okay? Might have a box in front of it. That, okay? Have fun. Sit there, dive into it. Try to think about elements. See, now those boxes I just drew are starting to feel like they're in the back of the room, right? They're no longer right up with me, they're in the back. And that brings me to sort of one of my next elements, which is overlapping shapes. Okay? So along with the grouping, one of the principles that actually sort of comes before the grouping is thinking and considering overlapping shapes. Okay? Overlap, if anyone looked at like one of the 12 principles of animation, one of the items they talk about in there are depth and spatial planes. Okay, creating depth, and we create depth with overlapping elements. Okay, so if I come in here and if I have a box that's like this, that's right here, and then behind it I have a box like that, I'm creating more depth because I have items overlapping each other. Okay? And just don't do the boxes. Think about the other things. What else is in the warehouse? We have rafters. We have roof detail. Okay? So I could come in here and I could sketch out like this. Basics. I might have some molding and trim, let's say, that's in here. Okay? Like that. Okay? Warehouses tend to have arched roofs of some kind, so I might have a roof that's like this. It then has a center line going down the middle. They have cross beams and support beams, so I could come in here like this and draw a couple of beams that are going across. Come back over here, draw it again. See what I'm getting at here? Now it starts to feel more like a warehouse. Okay. Warehouse have lights hanging down. So if you want to get daring and you want to think about having a light, okay, you can come up here, have a light drop down back here, and then you could come in here and say, remember that elliptical shape of where it is in relationship to my horizon line. So if I do this right now, I'm barely looking under that light, right? That would be the light that would be more consistent of being down here, just barely above my horizon line. Since this is so far up, remember the analogy of the coffee cup in the quarter? Since this is so far up right here, I'm going to be able to see quite a bit of elliptical shape underneath that, like that. Okay? So then comes up, now I know I'm throwing a lot of this at you. That's why Jim and I, one of the new classes that I'm writing right now is going to be a perspective and environmental layout class that focuses on taking perspective and applying it into drawing environments. Because once you learn that, it also applies to drawing props as well. And so then you can apply that. You can start, designing your own environments. Okay. So now, one thing I haven't talked to you, a couple of things I haven't talked to you guys about yet today, and I sort of skipped through this. So I'm throwing a lot at you really quick. Okay. Do you guys remember what transferring scale is? Okay. Transferring scale is the height relationships that exist on a ground plane. So if I come over here in perspective, if I have somebody that's this tall right here, and I want to know how tall that person is right there, how do I figure that out? Okay, it's really easy. All I have to do is I come over and I take a line from the top of my person and the bottom of my person. I converge that back to my vanishing point. So I'm going to come over right here. I can see where that goes. Oops. You can see how that's where my pen's slightly off. Okay. And if I come back here and go from here through the top, okay. And if I take a line through the base of that X, go horizontally across, go through the top here, and then bring that line back across like this, I know how tall somebody is right there. Okay. This is going to be important for you to understand. We call this transferring scale. It's the scale and size relationships of something and how it exists inside a room. So after I've done that, I can be able to come back in here and decide in my warehouse, like, hey, if I'm going to put a door right here, I have to make sure my door is going to be the correct height. So if I come in here and if I do this, and say that's going to be sort of a warehouse door right in here, okay, and then I come back here and I do this, there's a problem. Okay, my scale's way off. So how would I figure that out? It's really easy. I'm going to take the height of that door. Here's my VP right here, right? I'm going to take that height of that door. I'm going to bring it back till it hits this corner. And then when it hits that corner, I'm just going to bring it horizontally across. Okay, and then that's the base right there. So now I know that my door would be a little bit, there we go, that tall right there. Okay, that makes sense? Okay, transferring scale, another extremely important thing. So I'm throwing a bunch of stuff at you. We talked about horizon line, framing, placement of horizon line, placing a vanishing point in, and we talked about making sure that we have the proper indication of scale represented inside the ground plane. We talked about items getting distorted that fall outside of the cone of vision. We talked about a lot of different things. Okay, but this is enough right here for you to create a thumbnail for me. Okay, and for you to start working with. All right. Okay, 1 second. So real quick here, whenever I continue to draw, so I just map this out really quick here. So let's say I was going to continue drawing here, thinking about scale. I know where my horizon line is. I know where my main VP is right here. Okay, sometimes I even label it VP so I don't forget. Okay, but what I like to do is I like to think about elements that will be inside my location that are going to be instant giveaways. So when I think of a warehouse, what I like to do a lot of times is I write these items on the side here. Okay, I make a list. Okay, so someone already said pipes, which is excellent. Okay, something else you see with a warehouse. I was just going to say large windows. You see a whole row of windows. Why? Some warehouses tend not to be air conditioned, so they have huge windows that can open up. Also, a lot of warehouses are housing manufacturing equipment which generate heat, so they have these huge windows. So if I come over here on my drawing, and if I do something like this, excuse that horrible tangent, so imagine that shape up there a little bit. If I come in and do this type of thing, actually, let's say have it open. It's going to give the illusion that there is a dedicated window in here, and it's open. Okay? So I can write down windows. So I make my little list to go off of. Okay? Hanging lights is another item. Okay? What else could I have in my warehouse?
Are we only talking about like square objects?
No, it doesn't have to. I mean, just think of whatever. Huh?
Ceiling fans?
That's right. You can have ceiling fans or fans. Okay? You You can have forklifts, that's right. If you want to get adventurous and draw a forklift on the side, go for it. That's totally fine. Something else you have that I've always noticed in warehouses is you have walkways and paths. You have like tape on the floor that indicates this is a safe way to walk. This is where people are loading. Okay, so you have walkways. Okay. Something else you have is you have vents on the side. Something else you have wires. Okay, so you might have, let's say if I had a series of lights like this that are sort of hanging up here. If I were to rough this in real quick, and let's say I had another light, can't talk today, further up here. How do I figure out that light size? I come over here, go off my VP, I put a trace line through it right there. They're right, gosh, see what happens? The ruler and then the tip of the pen are both slightly off. There it goes. I have to get it right on there. Okay. So then I could figure out that light thickness right here. If I come over and I just draw a line right through it right here, I know it's going to be that thick. So I can come over here. Okay, so now I know what a light's going to be like closer to me, right? So if I come in here and I keep drawing, some of that you get used to and you can just freehand a little bit of it. You just check your perspective to make sure it's correct. Okay, so wires, cables, chains, right? That gives me the opportunity to have stuff like this hanging in the foreground. I might have a wire here, and then I might have some type of rope. So that's wires, rope, chains. And don't be one of my students before that gives me hanging bodies and stitch people. You know what stitch people are? The people with like little X's in their faces hanging on meat hooks, and that, no, don't do any of that, right? Okay, stay simple, right? So if I come in here and I keep roughing out my elements and I keep thinking of other little cool things, so now I could come in here and I might decide on this side to have, you know, one window with another sort of window on the side like this. Maybe my window's open. All right, and then I just rough that out real quick. If I need to check something, I come over here and I could take my ruler and be like, oh, I was a little off there. That's how my window should be. And then I could just fix it and I could erase the leftover there. Same thing here. I realize, oops, that's where it should be, about there. That's fine. Slightly erase it, rough it out. What else? We talked about pipes, right? So I can come in here and I might have some pipes on the wall coming down. Something else you see in warehouse a lot of times are like conduit pipes running around for electrical. So I might come over, and then frames too. So you see things framed up, or I might have like little rivets in part of this holding this together. Okay, I might have, so the conduit, I'm going to see lights above doors, so I can put other lights, door detail, signage you see a ton of. So I might come up here and put some type of sign that's like above part of this. I like to rough it in, and then I come back and sort of make sure the perspective is correct. I might have, you know, there might be a little light switch down here, and there might be like a conduit pipe that comes up, goes over, connects to here, sort of goes down this way. There might be another large sign hanging up over here. Okay. See, it's starting to fill up, starting to get more elements in there. Feel free to angle something if you want. Like if I want to make something look really appealing, I could come in here, recede a walkway, and then I could put an angle on it like this, and then I could angle it back here into the door like that. You see that? Back, recedes back this way, comes back here, angles off a little bit. There. So I could have a walkway that leads me to that door. So something else that we see, two other things. Okay. You see, I'm going to put walkways, but graded and elevated. Okay. So a lot of times in a warehouse you might see, so in my foreground here, I could have maybe a flight of stairs, and I could have this. If I come in here, I can give the illusion that right here, see what I'm getting at? This could be an underneath now, like that. and there could be somebody standing up here looking down. Okay. Another thing is that I have racks inside warehouses that hold up things on upper levels. Okay. What's something else in a warehouse that, besides everything I've listed on here, that's really common that makes a warehouse a warehouse? Here, I'm going to give you a gesture for it. A big rolling door, big warehouse door that rolls up. You know, big metal doors, giant doors. That's indicative. We call those warehouse doors, right? Those big things that roll up. You see at Costco and truck stops. So now, why? Because I have the normal direction of where people walk, but then I might come back here and think like, hey, a semi is going to back up in here. I'm going to put some indication of like a frame around it, and then I can come back and do this. Now I have a big giant roll-up door on the back, so I can write that down. Roll-up door. Okay. So right there, just writing down those things. I do that on anything that I design. If I'm working in Maya building a set, if I'm drawing, even when I work on characters, okay, I got to give credit to where that's due. I actually learned that Marshall Vandriff, when I was 18, pointed me towards this guy whose name was Don Richards. And Don Richards was a great, he's one of the core directors that established directing and method acting. Okay, and used to teach at UCLA extension class here. And the thing that he talked about is before you acted a scene, you needed to think about the core emotions and elements and things that made up that particular scene. That's the same thing that we're doing right here. So whenever I go to draw something, okay, or create something, if I'm doing, and I was actually thinking of doing this the other night, an old rickety house up on a hill, right? The first thing I start thinking is who's living there? Is this like an old house where someone good lives there, or is it old and evil? So let's say it's old and evil. So I start thinking of elements, and I start writing a list down on the right side of my drawing and thinking about what would I have that would apply to that. I would have old walkways. I would have old wood. I would have Victorian or Gothic-looking lights. Okay. I would have silhouette-shaped icons of like those cement hourglass-shaped rails. What do you call those that look like this? Okay, I might have something like this. You know what I mean? That might be indicative of sort of a Victorian ornate decoration. I might have other type of decorations like this. I might have really cool window decorations, a lot of Victorian theme, had tons of little detail and edges around it, okay? I'm going to have lots of angles on things, okay? I might have a little garden on the side that's dying, right? Anything to help influence that particular scene that I'm going to make. And what am I doing? I'm influencing it with shape language by creating shapes that are indicative of my general theme. Our theme right now, and this is what I want you guys to think about before I let you go, okay? Our theme for this project isn't just warehouse, okay? However, though, this is the part where I need your help, is what kind of warehouse are we talking about? Are we talking about a drug dealer's warehouse? Are we talking about people that are laundering money? Okay? Now, I did this one semester back a year ago, and I had people that gave me stuff. If I can't look at it and see what it is, or your neighbor next to you can't, then you didn't succeed. Okay? I had a guy give me a warehouse that's where the mob takes people to make them break. And there was like a pit and a cage, and I'm like, dude, you went way too far. Simplify it, bring it back down, stay simple and easy. Think more of it. What I'm talking about in your description, is it like a chemical warehouse? Is it perhaps a, let's just say, wooden storage, okay? Or not wooden storage, but crate storage facility. Any other warehouse ideas out there?
There's
like
toys and merchandise.
Toys, merchandise. You might have forklift. You might have. What about? I was thinking. What about like a packaging house where they have like those things that come down and they have stacks of cardboard? Some warehouses have conveyor belts, right? They have stuff that move. They have claws that pick stuff up and drag it across and move it in other parts of the room. Okay, there's all kinds of things you can add into there. So think of, you can just draw a base theme, or if you want to, think of another theme to add in there. I like the whole chemical, bad guys warehouse. I like to think of something in those terms. When I worked at Warner Brothers, we were always drawing. We had to do a ton of warehouses because Batman would get caught sneaking into Joker's warehouse, right? So, what would Joker have in his warehouse? Would he have round, happy shapes? No. He'd have like a box of weapons. There'd be cranes. There'd be hooks. I'd have a big hook like this hanging down. Oh, here's another thing I didn't even think about. There are these big metal hooky things like this that are like all solid steel, right? You might have a couple of those hanging in your warehouse. There are sliders that slide across iron beams, and you might have a couple of these guys like in there. You know, there's all kinds of little elements like that you could possibly have. Joker, whenever I would have to draw a warehouse, I would try to have boxes thin and sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Thin and evil looking. You know what I mean? I'd try to put them together and mass them around in a clump of shapes. I would try to group them together to help imply the negativity that this was Joker's warehouse. And it's not a warehouse that has toys, which is friendly or happy, let's say. Okay, I could use more happy shapes in there. So that's it. You know, just try to think about what you're doing. Just don't throw it down on paper. The more thought you put into your designs before you do them, the more successful you're going to be. The more you write down these little columns right here of words and important items and props that can be in there, the more successful. Oh, I just thought of something else. A push cart. You see push carts all the time in warehouses. So I could come up here in the foreground right now and I could do this. I could come over here and I could start drawing cameras. Excellent. See that? And I could draw a push cart in here. And what's on my push cart? More boxes. All right? Group them together. But see, look, by having all these boxes here now, like this, that becomes another grouping because it's a cart with elements on it. Becomes one more group. Okay. Anything else? Any last thoughts? Warehouse. Okay. It might be really intimidating and frustrating to some of you guys because you've never had to draw something in perspective 4, but it's really important. This is where you start and you really start figuring out how to overlap shape and you really get depth inside a scene. And once you start doing this and once you learn to master this, it's going to be great because it's going to help you master your own sensibilities of draftsmanship and you'll be able to apply it to whatever you want. So if you want to draw a creature, just to leave this real quick, when I go to draw a creature, one of the first things that I do, I don't have it dedicated, hold on. So one of the first things that I do is I throw in that line real quick. And then I do this really lightly. Why? I'm establishing a rough grid plane of some kind. It's giving me an indication of how, if I have a creature here, how my creature is going to anchor down to the ground and how his arms are going to fit back to his torso, how its back legs might come down and anchor down as well. Okay? I understand the differences between where these would be placed and how they could sort of make sense correctly. Does that make sense? I can place, so it's now I have what I want to see are these key points here to here to here and so on. Okay? That's what helps me when I start to draw something out. So I sort of threw that creature at some of you guys, our first assignment, to see how you would do with it. And some of you were missing a lot of that perspective. And when you leave this class, you will have a much better understanding of how to properly prepare. Now, one last thing. If you're totally lost with perspective, a great exercise to do are what I call trace overs. Okay, a lot of artists do these. You can come in here, you can take a piece of tracing paper, you can find an image like this. Okay, I'm going to do it in Photoshop. I'm going to lower the opacity. I'm going to come over on top, and you ask yourself, you try to find everything. Where's the horizon line? Okay, that's the point of the piece where I cannot, right there. Okay, there's my horizon line. Okay, and then you draw over the buildings. What are my buildings right here? I have a cube. I have a vanishing point here. Okay, that's the top of my building. 1 point perspective. I have another cube. How do I draw a van? Cube. Looks like a van, a cube, doesn't it? Okay, there's my van. Okay, and then you keep going. How do I draw buildings in the back? Come down here, Trace over them, bring them across. Okay, that's it. And you can do these little trace overs. This will help you with your perspective because you're looking at a picture that's giving you part of the answers, but then it's reinforcing your ability to have to go back and draw on top and figure out exactly where these shapes are. Okay, look at this foreground shape here. Okay, now before I let you go, I keep saying that. I keep extending it. I just realized I could let you guys out at 10:30. No, I'm going to let you go here. I'm going to throw this at you right now, but I don't expect you to master it at all. When we start working and you start developing in your environments, the next thing I want you to think about is this. This is what's really going to help you get a better understanding of depth inside your pieces. Okay? Let me just draw this super quick. Okay, this is what right here. This is just the way I do it, so I call this foreground. I call this section in here midground, and I call this section back in here background. Okay? And the reason why I do that is that's a terminology of language that we use when we're dealing with environments, conceptual art. Okay? We talk about add more elements in the foreground. If I have elements in the foreground overlap other elements, okay, I'm going to get a sense of depth. If I have elements in the midground overlapping the background, I get a sense of depth. Okay? The one thing that you want to watch too, which I have students do, I don't have any in here because I already know it how to sort of have it. I call it dead corners, dead triangles. And what it is, I'll have someone put all their focus, right in one area, like here, and then they leave out information in a corner. But what happens is I end up doing 1, 2, 3 corners they leave out with no information, and that's why I call those dead triangles. They're areas of the composition that have no information, no detail, and when you add those up, it makes up maybe 25% of your composition. So you can't just have all your detail in the middle of the scene and then nothing around it. You have to have supporting detail. It's just like when you have primary animation, you always have secondary animation, and you have tertiary animation. So that's, a character moves, you have the gesture, and then the hair is the secondary. And then maybe the third would be the effect of the light or the shadow, when that person's animating. It's the same thing here when we deal with any type of environment, okay? And that's it. I'll let you go. I could keep going, but I know there's something else I throw at you. So I'm going to stop it right now, and what I'm going to do is I'll see if I can process this overnight and come back. And
Bill?
Yes?
You want us to stick with only